What's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a little bit about the Denver Nuggets. I've been thinking a lot about the Western Conference heading into next season as of late, especially with my favorite team, the Thunder, as one of the top contenders out there. I've really been trying to analyze how the standings are going to fall and what teams fall into what tiers. There are clear squads like the Thunder, as well as like the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Dallas Mavericks, for example. I feel like they'll again be towards the upper echelon of the Western Conference. There are teams that are clearly going to be towards the bottom, like Portland and Utah. And then everything else feels like a jumbled up mess, whether it is a team that's kind of towards the middle of the pack that has established talent. It feels like maybe they could figure out more this season than they did last year. Teams are like just a move away, and if they make that splash, they could be one of the teams that jumps up. Teams that got worse, but it feels like they still got great talent. The Grizzlies are one of those examples of a really weird team where last time we saw them, they were really, really good, but that's now been over a year, and are they going to be ready to keep up with the new elite of the Western Conference? It's basically a jumbled mess out there in the West, but there's one team that's maybe more confusing than anybody, and that is the Denver Nuggets, the team that just was raising the Larry O'Brien trophy a couple of years ago, a team that I thought had the real makings of a potential new age dynasty, or if not a dynasty, a team that could for sure go ahead and win a couple of rings, and that is definitely still possible. But things have changed a lot over the course of the past 2 years. Like when they won their first ring, it was this same core group that's going the next year with Nikola Jokic at the helm as most people would consider the best player in the world. When they won the title, I think that was a pretty much unanimous opinion. He just led the playoffs in points, rebounds, and assists. I believe he was the first player to ever do that. Dominated some of the best bigs in the world en route to that, whether it was Rudy Gobert with Minnesota, it was Bam Adebayo, it was Anthony Davis. Didn't really matter who he faced. He was just torching basically everybody. Jamal Murray showed he was a playoff riser. Guys like KCP and Michael Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon contributed at a high level. And most of this core group was under contract going forward. Really, it was just some of the role players that were a bit more up in the air that were question marks that were going to have to go ahead and re-sign. But it felt like with the team that had so much potential going forward and, again, had just won a title, they were going to be fine and be one of the staples of the top of the Western Conference playoff picture for years. Last season, en route to trying to defend for their title, obviously they came up short, lost in the second round to the Timberwolves in what was a really crazy back and forth 7-game series where the Nuggets went out big at the beginning, but then fought back. But then Minnesota, behind Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert playing amazing defense, that team as a whole, Karl-Anthony Towns having a big game, role players like Jaden McDaniels and Gilgeous-Alexander, Mike Conley stepping up. A team that was kind of built to slow down the Denver Nuggets went ahead and stopped them. They felt like the team that had the best shot to prevent the Nuggets from going ahead and repeating as Western Conference champs. They did that. Wasn't enough to get the Timberwolves to the NBA Finals, but they took down the reigning champs. And for the Nuggets, it's immediately back to the drawing board. And there are a number of problems that sunk them. First of all, Jamal Murray wasn't exactly the same player he was the year prior. There was a lingering injury he was facing, so his health was a bit of a problem for them. Not to mention, the outside shot was not good enough, below 34% from the outside throughout their playoff run. You had a bunch of young guys that you're hoping would contribute, give you some depth that never really materialized. You take a look at Minnesota, who's one of the deeper teams in the league. For Denver, they've got the top end talent, but if those guys aren't contributing the way you need them to, you don't have guys in the back line to go ahead and pick up the slack. Whereas Minnesota has like a Nickeil Alexander-Walker off the bench, for example, or a Naz Reid who won 6th Man of the Year. Nuggets don't have that. Reggie Jackson was unreliable at best most nights. Peyton Watson was this great defender, but the offense left a lot to be desired. The young guys that they've drafted over the past few years all have a lot of potential and are interesting going forward, but weren't ready to contribute at a championship level quite yet. Like Zeke Naji, who was supposed to be their backup big, they were relying on him to take a jump. That never really materialized. He was just bad all throughout the season, so he really never played much. It was just not enough to beat a great team in Minnesota, and so the Denver Nuggets have to go back to the drawing board and figure out how they keep pace now with this stacked Western Conference that's only getting better when they were a second-round exit. And as I take a look at this team, I'm wondering where they are going to be in the hierarchy of the Western Conference. Because, again, just taking a look at the top-end talent, regardless of anything that's happened, they've still got Nikola Jokic, who is, in my opinion, still the best player in the world. He is one of the best offensive bigs of all time, maybe the single best offensive big when you take into account the all-time playmaking, the hyper-efficient scoring. Jokic is a savant on that end. They've got Jamal Murray, who, when healthy, is usually a playoff riser. He's not quite been an all-star yet, but he's an all-star level guard. Aaron Gordon is this great glue guy, this Swiss Army knife. Michael Porter Jr. is a near 7-foot knockdown shooter a lot of nights, and he had this like mini leap at one point during the season. During the playoffs, he wasn't quite at that level, but he's a player that has proven he can play at a really high level when he really locks in. Like, they've got amazing top-end talent, but the depth is still a major concern, and they lost one of the critical pieces of that starting five that made them so dangerous in Kentavious Caldwell Pope, who is a lockdown defender, one of their most important guys when it comes to that point of attack. So now that's a big concern because the defense was already a bit shaky. Not to mention one of their more reliable three-point shooters. He was a knockdown threat. So a team that already struggled to shoot throughout the playoffs last year, they have less shooting now. They lose that key defender, a guy that was just a glue piece in that starting lineup, which hurts their depth even more because Christian Braun was one of their few reliable bench cogs the past few seasons, and now they need him to step up into the starting lineup to replace KCP's production, and I just don't think he's ready to do that. First of all, he's not going to be the shooter that KCP is. He's not going to be the defender. And then you now don't have him off your bench anymore, so you need somebody else to step up. Is it going to be Julian Strother? Is he ready to contribute at a championship level quite yet? Is Peyton Watson's offense going to be more reliable? What are you going to get from Dario Saric, who you brought in that didn't play a lot last season down the stretch for Golden State, a team that didn't even end up making the playoffs? Like, how good is he going to be at this point in his career? I was hopeful that Deron Holmes would bring them some fun production as a backup big off the bench, and then he ended up tearing his Achilles, which is another major blow. It just feels like Denver keeps getting hit with punches left and right, and with how stacked this Western Conference is, it feels like while most teams are trending up, the Nuggets are trending the opposite direction. Now, one move they did make that I like that kind of spurred me to make this video today is the addition of Russell Westbrook. It's been rumored for a while that the Nuggets were going to go after Russ once the Clippers gave him to the Utah Jazz in that Chris Dunn sign and trade that was kind of in limbo for like 2 weeks, it felt like, but it just got done today. The Jazz are supposed to buy him out, and it's widely expected that Russell Westbrook will sign with the Denver Nuggets. And this is a move that I actually like. I think this is something they had to do. Didn't really have a reliable backup one because they salary dumped Reggie Jackson to try and give KCP the money to get him to stay. Of course, it didn't matter. He left for Orlando anyways. So they needed somebody to be a backup one, and Russ is going to be a lot more reliable than Reggie Jackson, even if he isn't playing at the best version of himself. But I do think if there's one place that at this point in his career can kind of get the most out of Russ, it probably is Denver. I would like to see Russ used in kind of a Bruce Brown type of role where he's just this energy guy off the bench who brings him some really solid gritty defense, who makes those hustle plays, who can run that second unit offensively. I think that's something that's going to be big. If Jamal Murray has to miss time, he can step up into that starting lineup. I think Russ, bringing him in, is a great fit. I'm excited to see how Michael Malone utilizes him, and I do think if there's any spot, again, where Russ's skills may be best utilized at this point in his career, it is Denver trying to fit him into that Bruce Brown type of mold. Now, Bruce Brown was also really effective because he hit those corner threes at a nice clip for the Nuggets throughout that championship run, so can Russ do that? That's a question we're going to have to wait and see. Of course, as a Thunder fan, as a lifelong Russ fan, I'm hopeful he can adjust and mold his game to what Denver needs him to do. I think this is a good spot for him to go if he wants to compete and try and win a ring at this point in his career. But I do have some concerns because it hasn't always gone great in the past few spots that he's landed in. And also it adds another non-shooter to a Nuggets team that, again, shooting is a concern with this team. And also Russ getting up there in age, he still brings to the table quite a bit of rim pressure despite being in his mid-30s. But it's going to continue to wane, so he's going to regress a little bit going into the season. It's just natural at this point for a guy who at one point was this hyper-athletic guard. Does that continue to take away some of his value because the jumper is definitely not reliable at this point? I don't know. I'm still worried that the Nuggets are relying on a mid-30s Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric at this point in his career to kind of be the saviors for them going into this next season. Again, with this stacked Western Conference between Dallas and OKC and Minnesota, as well as the Grizzlies making a comeback, and a number of those teams that are towards the middle who feel like if they really start clicking could become a threat in their own right. Like, outside of the Jazz and Blazers, every team is going to give you a really tough game, it feels like, this season for the most part in the Western Conference. And I'm not saying Denver's going to miss the playoffs or anything. I feel pretty certain they'll be a playoff team. I mean, Jokic got a way worse supporting cast than this back in, I think it was 2022 it was, to the playoffs. That's when he won the MVP as the 6th seed. Like, he got a way worse team to the playoffs in that season than this one. But if they deal with any major injury, the Nuggets are in a lot of trouble. And even if they don't, is this team good enough to take down some of those top squads? Are they still a championship contender? When I take a look at any team with Jokic, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, my immediate reaction is, yeah, for sure. But it does feel like I don't have nearly the confidence that I had in them in their first title run going into this past season. This is the least confident I've felt in the Denver Nuggets in quite a long time, and that's a little bit scary. Now, maybe it's misguided, maybe they figure it out, but just with the depth, the shooting concerns, the defensive concerns, it feels like a lot of things are popping up, and it's been a massive fall off from, again, when they won the title, everybody's talking about how many rings can they rack up in the Nikola Jokic era. This is the beginning of him establishing himself as like a top 10 player of all time, like without a doubt. Now we're thinking about, is Denver going to be able to get even one more in the Nikola Jokic era? Did they fumble the prime of one of the best players of this generation, one of the most dominant offensive bigs we've ever seen, with bad roster management, with misconstruction, with the inability to retain key free agents? Did they completely fumble this thing? And this season is going to determine a lot of that, determine what the future looks like and what history has to say about this Denver Nuggets team. But for right now, they're just very confusing in my head. A squad that I could see winning the Western Conference again because they just do have that top-end talent, and I never want to bet against Jokic, or a team that feels like they could be a shocking first-round exit or, another second-round exit again, and all of a sudden, what do they do from here? How do they get back to the mountaintop, and is it even possible with the way that they've kind of mismanaged a lot of this roster? So I just want to talk about the Nuggets for a little bit. Again, very, very confusing, a massive wild card in the Western Conference. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this Nuggets team. Do you think they're going to be a championship contender? Do you have them a tier below? Where do you have them finishing in the Western Conference? And do you think they can win a title this season? Do you just think Jokic is enough, plus that supporting talent? Is there anything you would do to kind of change up this roster going to next season? If you were the GM, I would love to hear your thoughts. But for right now, I appreciate you all watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I'll see y'all later. Real One, say it back.